A billionaire's mansion hides a broken truth. His son battles cancer. Drowning in loneliness, no wealth can ease. But when the maid makes an unthinkable sacrifice, shaving her head beside him, the moment shatters his father's. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Gabriel Steele's mansion towered above the cliffs like a monument carved from grief and pride. Its walls of glass and steel reflected the ocean's restless tides, a fortress for a man who had everything money could buy, except the peace of a healed heart. Once, laughter had filled these walls, back when his wife Isabella was alive. She had been the warmth of the house, the bridge between Gabriel's vast empire and the fragile threads of family life. But since her passing, the mansion had grown quiet, its endless halls echoing with absence. Gabriel buried himself in work. His empire, Steele Global Holdings, thrived under his iron command, and his name commanded respect in every boardroom. To the outside world, he was a man untouchable, the billionaire who bent industries to his will. But behind the glossy facade, there was a father who kept his distance, hiding pain in board meetings and business trips, leaving behind a son who needed him most. Ethan was only 8 years old, too young to carry the burden of illness, yet forced to endure it. The cancer had come like a storm, stripping away his childhood joys, confining him to hospital rooms and lonely days within the mansion. He had his treatments, his medicines, and his endless routines, but none of them replaced the presence of a father. Nurses came and went, speaking to him with gentle words but leaving before their names became familiar. Nannies tried to care for him, but none lasted. They whispered of the boy's sadness, of his stubborn silence that seemed too heavy for his age. The staff in the house respected Gabriel, but they also feared him. His grief had hardened into strictness. He demanded perfection in everything, from the polished marble floors to the performance of his employees. Mistakes were not tolerated. Yet the one thing he could not control, no matter his wealth or power, was the slow withering of his son's spirit. Ethan stopped smiling. He stopped asking questions. He spent hours sitting by the large window of his room, staring out at the ocean, watching waves rise and fall with a rhythm that comforted him more than people did. The community knew of the Steeles. They spoke in hushed tones at dinner parties, marveling at Gabriel's fortune while pitying his family. All the money in the world, they said, and yet the boy is so lonely. Some said he was cursed by fate, others whispered that Gabriel's coldness was to blame. He had lost a wife, yes, but in drowning himself in business, he had left his son adrift. Inside the mansion, the staff rotated in shifts. New faces arrived weekly, professionals hired through agencies, each with polished credentials and promises of patience. But the pattern never changed. They would try to reach Ethan, only to find his silence too much, his sadness too deep. Soon they left, some with tears, others with resignation. Gabriel fired more than a few himself, furious that they failed to give his son what he could not. 7 nannies, 4 nurses, countless attendants. The doors of the mansion revolved with strangers who never stayed. The boy remained unchanged. His small frame grew weaker, his once bright hair thinned from treatments, and his laughter became a memory no one could recall. Even when surrounded by luxury, every toy he could ask for, every comfort money could buy, he felt unseen. To him, the mansion was not a home but a gilded cage. Gabriel convinced himself he was doing what was best. He provided the best doctors, the most expensive treatments, the finest surroundings. He measured his love in money, in resources, in opportunities. Yet, in the quiet of his office, when he sometimes passed the framed photos of Isabella holding Ethan as a baby, he felt a sting of shame. She had always told him that children did not care about, just want to be held, she used to say. He had never truly understood until her absence left him facing a truth too painful to acknowledge. But even then, he stayed away. Work was easier than emotions. Meetings did not remind him of Isabella's laugh. Contracts did not bring back the memory of her touch. And so, he built his fortress higher, his walls stronger, shutting out not only the world, but his son. In those days, Ethan's room became both his sanctuary and his prison. He lined the windows with books he barely opened, toys he never played with, and medicines he couldn't forget. He spoke little to the nurses, less to the nannies, but sometimes, late at night, he would whisper to the dark as if hoping his mother might hear him. "I miss you," he would say, clutching a blanket she once wrapped around him. His voice never reached Gabriel's ears. And Gabriel, alone in his study with a glass of brandy, convinced himself that he was too broken to give his son what he needed. Better to hire others, he thought, though deep down he knew it was a lie. The mansion, once full of promise, stood as a testament to both Gabriel's power and his failure, and within its towering walls, the stage was set for the one person who would change everything, not through wealth or authority, but through simple, selfless love. The days fell into patterns that repeated endlessly. Gabriel would rise early, his schedule dictated by calls with international partners, his attention consumed by numbers and deals. He would see Ethan briefly, perhaps a glance in the morning, perhaps a distant nod at night. Words were rare, smiles rarer. He told himself it was enough. The boy, however, lived in a different rhythm. His mornings were marked by nurses urging him to take pills, his afternoons by lessons with tutors he barely acknowledged. At night, when the house grew still, he would sit by his window, the hum of the ocean his only companion. The moonlight painted his face with shadows, making him look older than his years, a child shaped by sorrow more than by play. Sometimes Ethan acted out in quiet rebellions. He refused medicine, ignored meals, or turned away from conversations. But instead of anger, what simmered within him was emptiness. The staff called it stubbornness, but beneath it lay something deeper, a longing that had no words, a wound no treatment could heal. Gabriel noticed, though he pretended not to. He saw the reports from doctors about his son's mental health, the recommendations from specialists who said he needed emotional connection, not just medical care. But Gabriel, trapped by his own grief, could not bring himself to bridge the distance. Each time he thought of sitting with Ethan, of holding his hand, of speaking the words his wife once spoke with ease, a heaviness filled his chest. So he avoided it, convincing himself that his son would forgive him one day, when he understood. The household staff exchanged worried glances when Gabriel passed by. They whispered of how Ethan's illness was not only in his body, but in his spirit, how the mansion itself seemed to weigh him down. Yet none dared to speak it aloud. To them, Gabriel Steele was untouchable. And so, the mansion became a world divided, a father consumed by duty and grief, a son drowning in loneliness, and an endless rotation of caretakers unable to bridge the gap. The story of the Steele family became one of wealth without warmth, of abundance without love. Beneath the silence, change was stirring. Life has a way of breaking even the strongest walls, of finding cracks in the hardest stone. Gabriel believed he had built a fortress that no one could penetrate, but soon a simple act of compassion would begin to undo everything he thought he knew. Ethan, unaware of what was to come, clutched his blanket one evening and whispered again into the dark. "I wish someone would stay." His voice trembled with hope and despair, a plea carried into the vastness of the night. Little did he know, the answer to his whispered prayer was already on its way. And for Gabriel Steele, the man who believed money could solve everything, the greatest lesson of his life was about to begin. The Steele mansion always seemed to breathe silence. Its corridors were long, its ceilings high, its rooms vast and echoing with the faintest steps. But silence in this house was not peaceful. It was heavy, like a burden no one dared touch. Ethan, small and frail with eyes too big for his thin face, often sat by the window overlooking the gardens, watching staff move about as if he were invisible. They came and went, faces changing so quickly that he stopped bothering to learn their names. Gabriel's wealth ensured the house never lacked cleaners, chefs, or attendants, yet none stayed long. The boy's illness required care, patience, and gentleness, but most saw him as a responsibility, a task, and worse, they feared his father. The billionaire's reputation for perfection and control suffocated everyone who worked under his roof. No mistake was forgiven, no bond was tolerated beyond professionalism. So when Clara arrived, no one noticed. She was hired through an agency, just another maid in a line of many. Her shoes were plain, her dress modest, her eyes downcast as she followed the butler into the grand foyer. She was not young, yet not old. She carried herself with quiet steadiness, as though she had lived through storms and learned to stand straight in the rain. To the staff, she was unremarkable. To Gabriel, she was invisible, but to Ethan, she would soon become everything. The first day, Clara did not rush. Others scurried about to impress, polishing, scrubbing, ensuring every glass surface gleamed. Clara moved differently. She worked with care but without haste, humming softly under her breath as she dusted a shelf lined with unread books. She paused often, looking at the house not as a workplace but as if it were alive, as if its silence was. When she passed Ethan's room, she noticed the boy's eyes peeking from the crack in the door. His gaze was wary, guarded, like a stray animal, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Clara did not speak. She simply gave a small smile and kept moving. That night, Ethan thought about that smile longer than he wanted to admit. The following morning, Ethan dragged his feet into the kitchen. His breakfast sat untouched as usual, a plate prepared by chefs who never asked what he liked. Clara was wiping the counter, her movements calm, steady. She glanced at him, then at the plate. "Hungry?" she asked gently. Ethan blinked, surprised. Most ignored him unless it was their duty. He shrugged. "I don't like it. What would you like instead?" He frowned, uncertain how to answer. No one had ever asked. Clara tilted her head, waiting patiently, not pressing. Finally, he whispered, "Toast." "Just toast?" Clara nodded, as though he had made the most important request in the world. She prepared it herself, simple bread lightly browned, a little butter spread with care. When she placed it before him, she did not watch expectantly, did not hover. She simply returned to her cleaning. Ethan took a bite. For the first time in weeks, he finished breakfast. That small act was the beginning. Over the next days, Clara's presence settled into the house like warmth slowly filling a cold room. She did not treat Ethan as fragile glass, nor as a burden. She spoke to him as though he mattered, whether about the weather, the flowers outside, or the books gathering dust in the library. She asked his opinion, she listened, and when he was too tired to talk, she simply sat nearby, polishing furniture or folding laundry, giving him company without demanding anything. The staff whispered. Some thought she was wasting time. Others noticed that Ethan no longer sulked as often when Clara was near. They began to realize she was different, though no one could explain why. Gabriel, however, remained unaware. He left early, returned late, and buried himself in meetings. If he passed Clara in the hall, he barely glanced at her. To him, she was another maid among dozens, irrelevant to his world. His focus was money, power, control, the empire that consumed every waking hour. But unseen by him, his son was beginning to come alive. One afternoon, Clara found Ethan sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at his bald reflection in a mirror. His treatments had taken what little hair he had left, leaving his scalp smooth and pale. The boy's lips trembled, though he tried to stay stoic. Clara lowered herself to the floor beside him. She did not tell him he looked fine. She did not offer empty words. Instead, she picked up the mirror, wiped it gently, and said, "It shows strength, not weakness. Hair will grow back, but courage." Ethan's throat tightened. No one had spoken to him like that. Everyone either pitied him or ignored the subject altogether. Clara's words planted something small but strong inside him. That night, for the first time in months, Ethan slept without tears soaking his pillow. Clara's way was simple, yet profound. She did not try to fix Ethan's illness, nor distract him with false cheer. She simply acknowledged his pain while reminding him of his worth. Slowly, the boy began to look for her. When she entered a room, his shoulders relaxed. When she left, he waited eagerly for her return. She noticed things others overlooked. She saw how Ethan's eyes followed the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. She handed him a feather duster one morning and said, "Want to help me catch them?" He laughed softly, chasing the specks of light like a game. For once, his laughter echoed through the halls, startling the staff. She noticed how his hands lingered over books, but hesitated to open them, so she asked, "Which one would you like me to read to you?" Together, they journeyed through fairy tales and adventures, the stories carrying him beyond the walls of the mansion. His pale face brightened as knights, dragons, and heroes filled his imagination. The staff began to talk. "The boy is different," they said. "That maid, she has something." But Gabriel still did not see. His meetings stretched late into the night. His phone calls drowned out the life of his home. If Clara crossed his path, he barely nodded. In his eyes, she was still just a cleaner, insignificant in his world of contracts and negotiations. One evening, however, Gabriel paused outside Ethan's room. The sound of laughter spilled into the hallway, his son's laughter. It startled him. He stood frozen, listening. Clara's voice carried softly, reading a story, while Ethan giggled at her préféré tones. Gabriel clenched his jaw, unsettled. He turned away before the moment could touch him. Days turned into weeks. Ethan grew more attached to Clara, his trust in her solidifying with each kindness. He began to eat more, laugh more, even walk in the garden when she encouraged him. To him, Clara was no longer a maid. She was safety, comfort, light in the suffocating silence of the mansion. Clara, for her part, did not think of herself as extraordinary. She cleaned, she dusted, she mopped, but she also gave the boy what money could not buy: presence. She listened to his dreams, his fears, his silence, and slowly she stitched invisible threads of connection between herself and the fragile child. The turning point came one afternoon when Ethan tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Stay with me tonight, just until I fall asleep." Clara hesitated. It was not her place, but the boy's eyes pleaded, raw with loneliness. She nodded. She sat beside his bed, humming softly, brushing her fingers gently through the air as if stroking away his fear. Within minutes, Ethan's breathing softened into sleep. In the doorway, unnoticed, Gabriel stood. His chest tightened at the sight of his son's trust in this quiet maid. But pride, grief, and fear held him back. He told himself it was temporary, that she too would leave like the others. He turned away before she saw him. Clara did not know he had been there. All she knew was that Ethan had slept peacefully, and that was enough. The mansion, once a place of silence, now carried faint echoes of change. Staff moved with less tension. Ethan's laughter broke the stillness, and somewhere, deep inside the walls, even Gabriel's fortress of grief began to crack, though he refused to admit it. Clara had arrived quietly, unnoticed, yet she was altering the very heartbeat of the steel mansion. And though Gabriel dismissed her as another maid, destiny had already set her role, not just as a cleaner of rooms, but as a healer of hearts. Clara started showing up before the sun, easing into the kitchen with the kind of quiet that never begged for praise. She warmed water for tea, checked the fruit on the counter, and listened to the house breathe. When Ethan shuffled in, pale and guarded, she did not greet him with questions. She slid a cup toward him and let the steam do the talking. He cupped the mug with both hands, as if it were a small fire. His eyes flicked to the doorway, half expecting a nurse or a new face to appear and measure him, weigh him, judge his progress like a chart on a wall. No one came. Only Clara, wiping a circle on the table until it shone. "Mornings better when they're warm," she said. "Not flavors, just mornings." Ethan took a careful sip. "It tastes like nothing." "Well, something," she answered. "Nothing means your mouth is resting. Rest is work too." He stared at the cup, surprised by the thought. Adult usually pushed, pressed, urged. Clara made space. The kitchen felt lighter for it. They made a ritual of silence. 10 minutes of shared quiet before breakfast. 10 minutes when no one asked his pain to perform. Sometimes she hummed a melody that didn't have a name. Sometimes he tapped the mug with a fingernail, making a tiny rhythm like rain on a window. On clinic days, she walked beside him down the corridor lined with framed awards and stiff flowers. He worried about the needle, the antiseptic smell, the way the hall swallowed sound. She matched her steps to his, small and patient. Halfway there, she would stop at the tall window where the ivy climbed. "Count 10 leaves," she'd say, "only the ones shaped like heart." He counted slowly, whispering numbers he'd refused to speak for weeks. By the time they reached 9, the panic had thinned enough to breathe through. 10 felt like a small victory they did not need to announce. During treatments, she sat in a chair by his bed and told stories that never pretended pain wasn't in the room. She let the IV stand, be a brave soldier, the beeping machines an orchestra that kept the tempo. She didn't promise everything would be fine, she promised she would stay. For a boy who had learned not to trust promises, that one landed like a blanket warmed by sunlight. The staff noticed first. A nurse passed the door and paused at the sound of laughter. The head housekeeper, who had folded more sheets than she could count, watched Ethan finish toast without bargaining. The chef, used to making perfect plates no one touched, found crumbs and smiled into his apron. They whispered in hallways because miracles start as rumors before they get brave enough to become fact. Clara never claimed credit. She cleaned when he slept, polished fixtures until they reflected a braver face back at him, and thanked every person who made his day. Even a finger went easier. When a new medication left him nauseated and gray, she brought a bowl of shaved ice and held it while he melted spoonfuls against his tongue. "Ice is quiet water," she said. He believed her. He believed the ice could scout and the water could follow. Belief made the swallowing easier. They played gentle games that never asked his body to be what it couldn't. Paper cranes became messengers that delivered jokes. Checkers turned into a tale about red kings rescuing black kings one square at a time. He drew faces on sticky notes and hid them under table edges for her to find. She drew a moon with a crooked smile and stuck it on his IV pole. "Even the moon has scars," she said. "See how it still glows?" When fear crawled up the bed at night, he pressed the call button, not for the nurse, but for Clara. Though he knew it reached the desk downstairs, not the cleaning cart at the end of the hall. Somehow she appeared anyway, footsteps soft, breath steady, hands warm. She didn't turn on the bright light. She sat and let their shadows sit with them. "What if I forget how to be brave?" he whispered once. "And I'll remind you," she said. "That's what people are for." "Here now. Will you be here tomorrow?" "I plan to be," she said, "and tomorrow will tell us if it agrees." He accepted that answer. It was the first truth that didn't scare him. Gabriel began to notice, without meaning to. A report slid unread across his desk after a meeting because he heard Ethan laughing 2 rooms away. He told himself it was an illusion, a sound caught in a memory, but then he heard it again, lighter, and his hand clenched around a pen as if it might steady him. He walked to the doorway and saw Clara pointing at the ceiling vent, while Ethan pretended it was a tiny volcano for paper ash. The billionaire stepped back before they could see the tremor in his face. He did not speak to Clara. He did not thank her. He clung to skepticism as if it were a guardrail. He had seen hope betray him before, and he would not grant it power until it proved it could stay. Clara kept showing up. She learned which days his skin felt too tender for sweaters, and which days the cold seeped into his bones and needed 2 blankets and a joke. She tracked his victories on a strip of blue tape on the wall, a private ladder only they could see, sat up without help, 2 blowed streak to window, 1 giant step for courage. She never cheered too loudly. Joy, she knew, could. One afternoon, after a difficult morning of tests, she brought a small wooden box into his room. Inside lay smooth stones, river-washed, thumb-shaped, close to warm. Each stone had a word inked in careful letters. Breathe. Stay. Strong. "What are they for?" he asked. "Pockets," she said. "Some words are too heavy to carry in your head. Pockets are stronger than thoughts." He chose here. He held it so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Later, when the nurse asked how he felt, he didn't answer with numbers. He closed his fist around the stone and said, "Here." It was the most precise thing he had said in months. The boy's smile returned in pieces, shy and sudden. It showed up when Clara balanced a teaspoon on her nose. It appeared when she mispronounced the name of a dinosaur on purpose and waited for him to correct her. It broadened when a window breeze lifted the paper cranes and made them sway as if they were nodding back to him. No one called it recovery. They called it a shift, a turning of the head toward light, a decision made in small muscles before big ones remembered how. Gabriel watched from a safe distance, the way a man watches the horizon for storms he cannot calculate. He kept his questions locked behind his teeth. How did the maid do this? How long would it last? What would happen to his heart if it ended? He chose silence because it had not failed him yet. Clara chose presence because it never failed anyone. One afternoon, she wheeled him into the garden. Sunlight reached through leaves like careful fingers. They named birds they didn't know, inventing species with grand titles and tiny crowns. A squirrel darted past. Ethan gasped and clapped, surprised by his own delight. From the balcony, Gabriel watched, afraid to blink and miss it. The next morning brought a setback that darkened the doorway before it crossed the threshold. Ethan woke with pain crowding his ribs, the kind that made even air feel heavy. He turned to the wall and went still as a statue. Clara did not flood the moment with sound. She set a small fan on the table, opened the window an inch, and laid a lavender sachet near his pillow so the room smelled like a field instead of a ward. "Were you objected to the program?" she asked. He whispered. She nodded and drew pictures instead. A cup, a leaf, a cloud, a window. He blinked at the ones he needed. Cup, she poured water. Leaf, she pointed to the ivy outside. Cloud. She shifted the shade so a soft shadow moved across the wall. Window. He watched the square of sky until the ache loosened enough to breathe around. He slept, hand locked around his pocket stone. When the nurse checked his monitors, she found steadier numbers than pain should allow. Later, she stopped Gabriel in the hallway. "Whatever that maid is doing," she said, "it's lowering his distress. It isn't clinical, but it works." He wanted charts. He got a truth that did not fit on a graph. "Give her what she needs," he said, trying to sound like a man approving a budget, rather than a father admitting he'd missed something important. From the office doorway, he watched Clara show Ethan how to anchor a blanket at his toes so air tunneled underneath. The boy smiled at the puffed cover, as if it were a tent that could shelter him from needles and alarms. Gabriel stepped back, heartbeat uneven, then returned to emails he could not read. In the laundry, the head housekeeper said, "You're good with him." "Learning him," Clara answered. "People have worn places. If you scrub too hard, you turn them to holes." "Where you'll leave," the woman said softly. "Everyone leaves." "I'm here today," Clara replied. "That's the promise I can keep." In brighter hours, they built tiny carnival games on the bedside tray, ring tossed over bottle caps, a sleepy dragon target painted on cardboard, a joke deck that made him groan and grin. On harder hours, she matched his breathing in a chair and let silence do the heavy lifting. Slowly, his laugh returned in ribbons, winding itself into corners of the room like light. She set a small mirror at an angle so it didn't surprise him. "Optional," she said. "Faiths sometimes need proof they still know how to be brave." He glanced and flinched at the pale boy staring back. "I look like a ghost." "You look like a warrior at work," she answered. "Work has a look." He studied himself again, testing the word warrior on his tongue without saying it out loud. Tuesday brought the first clump of hair. His hand came away threaded with strands, and his eyes went wide as if the future had stepped out from behind a curtain. Clara held a small bin. He dropped the hair inside like something fragile. "It means the medicine is trying," she said. "It means people will stare." Words two agreed. "So we choose how to be seen. Do we want hats, hoods, nothing? Stars painted under a cap?" He swallowed. "What would you choose?" "I could choose to stand next to you," she said, touching her own hair thoughtfully, a decision flickering behind her eyes. "So you never feel like the only bold thing in the room." She returned with soft beanies in gentle colors. He chose blue and pulled it low. He looked smaller and fiercer at once. From the shadowed hall, Gabriel watched the exchange. The sight struck him like memory. A scarf on his wife's neck, a smile she wore for him as if it were armor. He retreated before the past could knock him to his knees. That afternoon, Clara brought a handful of index cards with feelings printed in block letters and swipes of crayon. Angry, scared, bored, brave, tired, finally. She fanned them on the blanket. "No speeches required," she said. "Point." He tapped finish, then scared, then slid brave under his palm without quite letting go of the others. She nodded as if he had answered a riddle. "All legal," she said. "You're allowed to be more than one true thing." Above the bathroom mirror, she strung a line and clipped up small tokens with clothespins. "Victories," she said, "not the kind other people count." The beanie tag went up first, then a doodle of a dragon wearing its own cap, then a sticky note that said, "Here." Winds whispered where trophies would have shouted. The house shifted around them. The butler softened his walk past the room. The chef carved apple stars that tasted like childhood. The gardener left mint on the sill because it smelled like clean beginnings. No one announced these gestures. They spread like warmth from a radiator, quietly, persistently. In the elevator one evening, the car juddered and stilled between floors. The light hummed and Ethan's breath turned shallow. Clara crouched to match his eyes. "Name the bravest thing in this elevator," she said. He stared at the panel. The button. It calls for help and waits. "Let's be buttons," she whispered. "Press me." He pressed her shoulder. "Help." "Received," she said. "We're already moving." The car lurched, then glided to a halt. When the doors opened, Gabriel stood there, jacket unbuttoned, tie loose, as if he had run up the stairs to tear the doors apart. He saw them laughing a little, saw Clara brush fear off with a steady hand, and he nodded to the technician because gratitude toward her might break him open. That he asked, "If I lose all my hair, will you still sit with me?" "We will sit, stand, walk, and wait," she said. "Whatever the hour decides." "What about people who stare?" "Stare back until they remember their manners," she said. "And if they keep staring, we'll charge a ticket fee and buy more beanies." He smiled and put the blue one under his pillow like a talisman. Gabriel lay awake and listened to the house breathe. He had built a fortress to keep pain out, and pain had moved in anyway. Now, softness of all things was pushing it back. He could not name the emotion that rose in his throat. It was too round, too bright, too dangerous to swallow. He closed his eyes and saw Clara's hands holding a small bin while his son let go of what he could not keep. Days found their rhythm. Ethan asked to count the ivy leaves again. 10, then 12, then 14. He kept the hair stone in his pocket and checked it with a thumb when grown-up words failed him. He laughed at bad jokes and learned to rest without apology. He ate 2 apple stars and saved one for later because saving something made tomorrow feel real. From the doorway, Gabriel admitted silently that the boy looked less alone. He still did not thank the woman making it possible. Praise felt like a bridge he was afraid to cross because he did not know if it would hold. But his feet had moved one step closer without his permission. The distance between them had shrunk by the length of a truth. Clara kept showing up. She did not calculate odds or pray for guarantees. She folded towels, invented small games, and made room for tears when they came. She stayed, and in the staying, a bond took root. Quiet, deep, and steady enough to carry the weight of what was coming next. Gabriel felt the change and feared hope returning. The nights inside the steel mansion carried a silence that weighed heavier than any storm. By day, the house gleamed with polished marble, chandeliers, and servants moving briskly along their duties. But when the sun fell and the lights dimmed, the silence pressed into the corners, thick with unspoken grief. Ethan often lay awake through those hours, the machines near his bed humming, his thoughts sharper than the ache in his fragile body. It was in those quiet, heavy nights that Clara noticed the truth of his greatest fear. She had been folding the boy's blankets when she heard a soft sob muffled beneath his pillow. At first she thought he was dreaming, but then the sound sharpened into choked whispers. Clara knelt beside him, brushing a hand across his trembling shoulders. "Ethan," she whispered, "tell me what hurts." His hand slowly lifted the pillow, and his tear-streaked face appeared in the pale light. The boy's voice cracked as he spoke. "It's not just the needles. It's not just being tired. I don't want to be laughed at. I don't want to look like a monster." Clara's chest tightened. She didn't need him to say more. She had seen the strands of hair that already fell on his pillow. The way he avoided the mirror in the hallway, the small tug of his cap whenever staff walked past. She understood. His fear wasn't only of sickness. It was of losing the one thing that still made him feel like a normal child. She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his hand into hers. "Ethan," she said gently, "you are not a monster. You are a boy who is braver than anyone I know." He shook his head violently. "When the kids at school see me, they'll laugh. They'll say, I'm weird. I look ugly." Her heart cracked at the words. "Who told you that?" "One had to," he whispered. "I just know. People stare. They always stare when someone is different." Tears welled in her own eyes, but she blinked them away for his sake. "Let them stare," she said softly, "because when they look at you, they won't see ugly. They won't see ugly. They'll see a boy who is stronger than their words." But Ethan's little shoulders quivered, and Clara knew comfort wouldn't erase the fear that sat deep in his chest. She stayed beside him until his tears slowed, brushing her thumb across his knuckles, humming low until his eyelids fluttered closed. Yet even as he drifted to sleep, she could feel the tremor of his. The next morning, she noticed him carefully pulling a hoodie over his head, even though the summer air outside was warm. When she tried to make light conversation, he kept tugging at the hood, covering his hair as though every eye in the house would see through him. The other staff noticed too, whispering with pity. "Poor child," one said in the hallway. "Soon he won't have any left." Clara's jaw tightened at the comment, but she said nothing, only quickened her pace to shield Ethan from overhearing. That evening, she found more strands of hair clinging to his pillow. He sat cross-legged on the bed, eyes wet, fists clenched. "It's happening," he muttered. "I can't stop it. I could just—" Clara dropped to her knees in front of him. "Ethan, listen to me. Beauty isn't in hair. It's in the way you fight. It's in the way you keep going even when it's hard." "The kids won't see that," he insisted bitterly. "They'll just see a bald boy." She swallowed hard, fighting to stay steady for him. "Then, we'll show them together. You won't be alone in this." The words tumbled out before she realized the weight of the promise she was making. But she knew in that moment she would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect the fragile boy from the cruelty of the world, even if it meant carrying his fear herself. Meanwhile, Gabriel Steele remained a figure carved in marble. He spent his hours behind glass walls, buried in board meetings and negotiations. He saw his son's treatment only in brief updates given by doctors. He believed progress could be measured in percentages and reports. The raw, silent despair that Clara witnessed in the boy's bedroom was invisible to him. He could not hear Ethan's muffled sobs. He could not see the strands of hair falling into Clara's hands as she quietly swept them away before he could notice. To Gabriel, business was order. To Clara, Ethan's hidden battle was chaos wrapped inside a child's skin. At night, when the mansion grew cold and quiet, she lingered by Ethan's bedside. Sometimes she told him stories about warriors who shaved their heads before battle to show no enemy could take their pride. Sometimes she let him press his face into her sleeve until his breathing calmed. Each night, she whispered the same words. "You are not alone. You will never be alone." And though he never answered, his small hand always gripped hers tighter. Still, the cracks deepened. She began to see dark circles beneath his eyes, the toll of fear as much as sickness. She knew the doctors would only treat the disease. No one else in the house would treat the boy's spirit. That was her task, even if Gabriel himself never noticed the price she was paying. The breaking point came on a night when rain lashed against the tall windows and thunder rolled across the grounds. Clara was heading toward the linen closet when she heard it, the sound of Ethan crying, louder than usual, guttural, raw. She rushed to his room, heart hammering. He sat on the bed, clutching a clump of his own hair in his small fist, streaming down his cheeks. His hoodie lay crumpled on the floor. "Clara," he sobbed, "it's all coming out. I look horrible. I don't want anyone to see me." She hurried to him, kneeling on the rug, pulling him into her arms. His frail body shook violently. She stroked his back, whispering, "It's okay, Ethan. It's not horrible. It's part of the medicine working." "Hate it. I hate it." His voice cracked. "Why me? Why can't I just be normal?" Her eyes burned, but she pressed her cheek to his head, letting his tears soak into her blouse. "You are normal, Ethan. You are brave. You are loved. And you are not your hair." He clung to her, sobbing until his strength gave out. Clara rocked him gently, every fiber of her being aching. When he finally sagged against her, worn out, she carefully brushed the loose strands from his hands, placing them in a small box. "This isn't a loss," she told him softly. "It's proof you're fighting. Every strand means the medicine is working." He nodded weakly, though she could tell he didn't believe it. That night, after tucking him under his blankets, Clara sat awake in the chair by his bed. She stared at the boy's fragile frame, her own heart splitting. She realized then that his greatest wound wasn't physical. It was invisible, carved into the way he saw himself. And wealth, medicine, even the towering walls of the mansion couldn't heal it. Only love, only presence could reach him. The following days were heavy. Ethan refused to leave his room, pulling his hood low whenever someone entered. He turned mirrors away from himself and muttered that he didn't want to eat. The staff tiptoed around, sympathetic but powerless. Gabriel was rarely home, buried in meetings about investments and image. Clara felt the burden pressing harder each day, but she refused to yield. She brought sketchbooks and crayons, encouraging Ethan to draw what he felt. He drew shadows at first, dark scribbles of storms. Slowly, under her encouragement, a small figure appeared in his drawings, always with a cap pulled low, but always standing in light. One evening, as she tugged him in, he whispered, "What if people laugh at me?" Clara squeezed his hand. "Then I'll be beside you, and they'll have to laugh at me too." He gave her a small, shaky smile, the first in days. "You'd do that?" "I'd like to do anything," she said firmly, and in that moment she meant it with all her soul. Meanwhile, Gabriel returned late that night, his mind consumed with shareholder reports. Passing by his son's room, he paused at the door. Through the crack he saw Clara sitting beside Ethan's bed, holding his hand while he slept. Her eyes were wet, her face weary, but her posture steady, unyielding. Gabriel stood there, struck by the sight, but turned away before she could notice. Yet the image clung to him, unsettling the walls he had built around his own grief. As days bled into nights, Clara bore witness to Ethan's hidden struggle. She saw the way he traced his fingers across his scalp in the mornings, as if testing what was left. She heard the soft sniffs when he thought no one could hear. She caught the way he avoided windows, fearing the reflection. And every time she met his fear with unwavering patience. "You are not less," she told him. "You are more than you realize." Her words became a lifeline, a fragile thread pulling him back each time despair tried to drag him under. For Ethan, she was no longer just the maid. She was the one person who saw the pain he couldn't name, the wounds his father's wealth couldn't heal. And for Clara, the boy had become more than her duty. He was her heart's mission, her sacred vow. She knew the struggle wasn't over, but she also knew one truth more powerful than fear. Ethan was not alone. As long as she breathed, she would not let him face the darkness without her hand in his. The evening settled over the estate like a velvet curtain, soft and heavy after a day of brittle meetings. Gabriel came home earlier than usual, his tie loosened, his phone finally silent. Lamplight pooled on the marble. He paused by Ethan's door out of habit, meaning only to glance in and continue to his office. A ribbon of light spilled from the adjoining bathroom. He touched the door with a fingertip and stilled. In the mirror's wide reflection, he caught the scene, Clara standing behind Ethan, who sat on the closed lid of the toilet, a towel draped like a cape around his shoulders. The bathroom counter held a buzzing clipper, scissors, a small bowl of warm water, and a line of tissues. Clara's hair was still intact in that first heartbeat of recognition, tied back in a loose. Ethan's face shone with tears, but he was watching Clara with a look Gabriel had no. "Are you ready?" Clara asked. "Only if you say yes." Ethan swallowed and nodded. "I'm scared," he whispered. "No," she said. "You don't have to be brave alone." Gabriel blinked hard. He expected to see Clara lift the clipper to his son's head, to shepherd him through the first touch of loss. Instead, she turned the clipper to her own temple and pressed the teeth to her hair. The buzz filled the room. A clean swath appeared against her scalp. Ethan's breath hitched, then steadied. Clara met his eyes in the mirror and smiled, a quiet, unwavering promise. "It's only hair," she said. "It's not who we are." Another pass and another. Dark strands slid down her neck, scattered across the towel wrapped around her shoulders, and fell to the tile like soft rain. Ethan reached out without thinking, fingers hovering as if to catch them before they landed. Clara tipped her head toward him. "You can touch. It's all right." The boy's hand trembled as he brushed the newly bare skin above her ear. He looked up at her, astonished. "It feels warm," he said, wonder overtaking the fear. "Warm and strong," Clara replied. "Two things no mirror can show." Gabriel's chest tightened until it hurt to stand still. He had bought hospitals, hired specialists, paved entire corridors with his name, yet this woman, in a borrowed towel and sensible shoes, was giving his son something his money never could: companionship that did not flinch. He stayed at the threshold, invisible to them both. Clara moved slowly, deliberately, shaving one side, then the crown, turning the act into a ritual without drama. "Tell me a secret," she said lightly, as if they were braiding for a party. "One small one." Ethan sniffed. "I hate the peppermint mouthwash," he confessed. "It tastes like trees." Clara laughed quietly. "We'll find a new one. Maybe bubblegum?" He nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "And I still sleep with Rocket when I'm scared." "And Rocket is doing his job," she said. "Everyone needs a teammate." Gabriel swallowed against the ache rising in his throat. He had believed himself a champion, lifting his son with resources and schedules. He had won the battles he knew how to fight, but he had not thought to share fear, to empty his hands of power and offer the simple currency of presence. Clara's braid thinned, then disappeared. With each pass of the clipper, she met Ethan's eyes, as if handing him courage, peace. When she finished the final strip, she clicked the clipper off, and the room exhaled. The sudden quiet felt holy. Clara rubbed her scalp with the warm cloth, then held the mirror so Ethan could see the two of them together, his patchy hair, her perfectly bare head, two moons reflecting the same light. He stared for a long moment, his lip wobbled. Then a sound broke from him that Gabriel had tried to remember for months. Laughter, bright and shocked, like a bird bursting from a cage. Ethan reached up with both hands, touching Clara's scalp with gentle awe. "You look like a superhero," he said. Clara's grin bloomed. "I was going for aerodynamic." He giggled, sliding his palms over the soft stubble. "Does it feel funny?" "Only in the best way," she said. "Like wind can find me faster." He tipped his head, curiosity now larger than dread. Can we do mine next?" Clara's eyes softened with relief. "Only if you want. We can take it slow." Ethan straightened, squaring his small shoulders. "I want a match." Gabriel leaned his forehead against the doorframe, breath unsteady. He remembered the nurse describing hair loss in clinical words. He remembered nodding, as though memorizing a chart. He had not understood it would be a threshold his son feared to cross alone. He had not understood that someone might volunteer to go first. Clara draped a fresh towel over Ethan's shoulders, carefully tucking it at his neck. "Tell me the story you want to hear," she said, lifting the clipper. "One about dragons," he answered, "but make the dragon friendly." "Friendliest," she promised. She guided the clipper gently across Ethan's head. He flinched at the first vibration, then relaxed as she narrated a tale about a brave boy who met a dragon with a mirror-bright back, a creature who reflected fears until they shrank to their true size. Hair drifted like dandelion fluff to the floor. Ethan watched it go, his mouth gathered again. Clara pressed a warm cloth to his forehead and kept talking until the tears dried on his cheeks. "We'll be twins," she said softly. "Team Starlight. No one faces the night alone." "Team Starlight," he echoed, a small beam crossing his face. Gabriel's vision blurred. He wiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand and tasted salt. The man who could buy everything could not buy this. This brave, shining ordinary, of one human promising another. "I will stand with you inside the fire." Clara finished the last pass and turned off the clipper. Ethan's head was smooth, the shape of it delicate and strong. She dabbed away stray hairs, then drew a tiny star on his towel with a finger. "You did it," she said. "We did it," he corrected and hugged her waist. She laughed, hugging him carefully back. "We did it." From the doorway, Gabriel finally stepped inside, drawn by gratitude stronger than shame. He spoke before either could startle. "Don't stop on my account." Ethan turned, eyes bright. "Dad, look." He tipped his head, proud, the towel slipping like a cape. "We're twins." Gabriel's mouth opened, then closed. The words he carried, the careful speeches, the reassurances about doctors, felt useless. All he could manage was the truth. "You are the bravest person I know." Ethan glowed under the words. Clara straightened, self-conscious for the first time, one hand rising to her bare head. "Sir," she began, uncertain. Gabriel shook his head and looked at her properly, as if the fog had lifted for the first time in months. "Thank you," he said, the phrase stark and inadequate. "For going first. Thank you." Clara lowered the clipper to the counter and folded the towels into a little hill of softness. "We should rinse," she said, voice practical again. "Warm water, no soap, gentle packs." She turned the tap and tested the temperature on her wrist before guiding Ethan forward. Gabriel stepped back to give them space, holding the door. Ethan leaned over the sink. Clara cupped water onto his scalp, the motion rhythmic and sure. He shut his eyes, a faint smile fluttering as the warmth soothed the tender skin. "It tickles," he said. Eventually, there were no more raps, Clara replied. "Best feeling?" Gabriel reached for a fresh towel and held it out. Clara met his hand without looking, her fingers brushing his for a beat that startled them both. "Thank you," she said softly, and wrapped the towel around Ethan's head like a turban. She dabbed at the floor with a second towel, then glanced up. "I'll clean the rest after he sleeps." "I'll send someone," Gabriel said automatically, then faltered. He looked at the drift of hair, at the clipper, at Clara's bare head shining under the bathroom light. "No, I'll help." Ethan peered at him, surprised. "You don't know how to clean," he said with sleepy honesty. Gabriel laughed, a raw sound. "You might be right, but I can learn." Clara's eyes warmed as if he had lifted a window. "Hand me the dustpan," she said. "You can be the hair catcher." He obeyed, kneeling on the tile. He held the pan steady while Clara swept gentle arcs. Ethan watched them with an expression Gabriel had rarely seen on his son's face. Safety witnessed. Effort shared. When they finished, Clara tied the garbage bag and left it by the door. "Team Starlight cleans up after the big moment," she said. "Rule number 1. She tapped Ethan's towel. "Ready for pajamas?" He nodded and slid off the toilet seat. Gabriel lifted him before he could jump, mindful of balance. Ethan's arms looped around his neck with easy trust. The knot in Gabriel's chest loosened another notch. In the bedroom, he set Ethan on the bed while Clara drew the curtains and turned down the comforter. She handed Gabriel a soft cotton shirt with stars. "Favorite," she said. They dressed him together, movements quiet and efficient. Ethan nestled against the pillow. "Will I be cold?" Clara smoothed a knit cap over his head. "Cozy," she promised. "Also stylish." "Superhero stylish," Gabriel added. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle. "What do heroes do before sleep?" "Stories," Ethan said, already yawning. "Dragon again?" Clara took the chair, her hands folded in her lap. Gabriel cleared his throat. "May I try?" He felt absurdly nervous. Clara nodded, encouragement gentle as a hand on the back. He began haltingly, borrowing her mirror brick dragon and adding a castle with windows shaped like hearts. Ethan's eyes fluttered, a smile flickering at each familiar turn. When his breathing deepened, Clara rose and adjusted the blanket one last time. They stood in the doorway and watched the rise and fall of his chest. The house seemed to inhale with them. Gabriel whispered, "I didn't know what to do with fear except crush it." Clara kept her voice low. "Sometimes fear only shrinks when someone says, 'I see it too.'" He looked at her, at the brave geometry of her newly bare head. "You gave him a bridge, and you didn't ask permission?" "Devonish," protested Hope. "I didn't think it was mine to ask," she said. "It was his fear." "You gave a piece of yourself." "He loses enough," she answered simply. "I could lose hair." Silence stretched between them, not empty but full. Gabriel tried to name the feeling erupting in him, and failed. It was gratitude, yes, but also shame, unwinding its grip, and something like awe. "Clara," he said, and stopped, uncertain what request might be fair. "If anyone questioned this, if anyone suggested it was improper, I would defend you." Her mouth tilted, a shadow of humor. "Then start by defending your son's right to be fragile." He took the words like medicine. "I will." They moved to the kitchen, where the clock hummed and the kettle gleamed. Gabriel reached for cups, and then remembered he did not know where anything lived. Clara smiled and found mugs, tea bags, a jar of honey. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She asked, "You weren't unkind." To it for thinking care can be outsourced and love delegated. For leaving him alone with a monster I didn't recognize because it didn't have a number attached to it? Clara stirred her tea. Monsters without invoices are the sneakiest. He huffed a laugh. Apparently, she glanced toward the hallway. He'll wake tonight and check that we're still here. He always does after big days. If you sit at the foot of the bed and hum anything at all, he falls back within minutes. I don't know what to answer, he admitted. Afton breathed. She said, let him hear it. He nodded, finishing the tea in 2 gulps he barely tasted. Clara, he said again, the name now a promise to remember. You changed tonight. She shook her head. He changed himself. I just went first. He walked her back to the doorway of Ethan's room. They sat on the floor beside the bed, backs to the wall, the carpet thick beneath them. Ethan stirred once, and Gabriel leaned forward, his breath slow and visible in the rhythm of the child. Clara rested her arms around her knees. When my little brother shaved his head for me, years ago, I thought I would drown in love, she said, almost to the dark. It was the first time fear looked smaller than I was. Gabriel turned toward her. You never told me you were ill. It was a long time ago, she said. Different story, same feeling. She should have asked more questions. You're asking now? I want to deserve this house again. Then keep showing up, she said. Not as the man with solutions, but as his father. I will try. They kept vigil until Ethan shifted and let out a soft sigh, diagonal across the pillow, the knit cap askew. Gabriel rose, set the cap straight, and tucked the blanket under his chin. Clara smiled, a small flare of light in the dim. At the threshold he paused. Clara, he murmured, the name feeling like the opposite of loneliness. Thank you for teaching me how to stay. She glanced at her reflection in the window, at the bare curve she had offered as a lantern. They stood there, breathing the same slow rhythm, listening to Ethan dream. Outside, the rain softened, like a promise kept for the first time. You stayed tonight, she said. That's how it begins. Tonight? Gabriel could not sleep that night. The image of Clara kneeling on the bathroom floor, her hair falling like dark rain around her shoulders as she pressed the buzzing clipper to her head, replayed over and over. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the courage in her gaze, the unwavering tenderness in the way she matched Ethan's trembling with her own quiet strength. He had built his life on logic, on control, on calculated choices measured, but nothing in his world of contracts and numbers had prepared him for a maid who would shave her head just to keep his son from feeling alone. When dawn stretched across the horizon, Gabriel was already in the garden, pacing along the stone path. The roses his late wife once tended stood half wild, their thorns untamed, their blooms leaning toward the sun. He rubbed his temples, restless. How could a woman with so little shake the very foundation of his certainty? He thought of Clara's words, the ones that Abram's convenience and care is not a service. By the time he returned inside, Ethan was still asleep, curled beneath his blanket with the knit cap sliding off his head. Clara was in the kitchen, her bare scalp hidden under a simple scarf, porridge, as though the night before had been nothing extraordinary. The domesticity of it struck him, how she carried herself without demand for acknowledgement, without seeking praise. He cleared his throat. Clara. His voice was rougher than he intended. She looked up, startled, a spoon hovering above the pot. We need to talk. Her eyes steadied, calm even beneath his sharp tone. Of course, sir. She set the spoon aside and untied the apron. Her hands brushed against the scarf as though reminding herself it was there. Where would you like to talk? Study, he said, and turned before she could see the hesitation behind his command. The study was a room of glass and mahogany, built to intimidate and impress. Contracts had been signed here, rivalries ended, fortunes decided, but as Clara entered, the morning light caught the curve of her shorn head beneath the scarf, and the room felt suddenly smaller, less grand. She closed the door quietly. Gabriel stood by the window, awe and a fear he dared not name. Word tore from him sharper than he intended. Why would you do such a thing? His eyes searched hers, desperate, demanding. You shaved your head, your hair, Clara. For what? For pity? For some sentimental gesture? Clara didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her voice steady, calm. Not for pity. for presence. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Presence? He scoffed, though the word unsettled him. Do you have any idea how reckless that was? You're supposed to be here to clean, to maintain order, not to... He trailed off, the image of Ethan's laughter choking his protest. Clara lifted her chin, her courage quiet but unyielding. True care isn't about duties or wages, sir. It isn't about following a job description. It's about standing where someone is most afraid and refusing to let them face it alone. Ethan was drowning in fear. I could not watch him sink. Gabriel felt the weight of her words like blows against the armor he had worn for years. You think shaving your head changes his reality? His cancer is still there. His fight hasn't disappeared. Clara agreed softly. But now he doesn't have to face it in isolation. You measure care in cures and results. Children don't. They measure it in moments, in who chooses to stay. Ethan doesn't need me to fix his illness. He needs me to show him he is not less because of it. Gabriel's breath faltered. For the first time in years, words failed him. He turned back to the window, staring at the restless city skyline beyond the glass. Do you know how much I've given to make sure he gets the best? The best doctors, the best treatments, the best environment. I've spent millions to ensure he has a chance. Clara's reply was gentle, but her gaze did not waver. And yet the one thing he longed for last night was not a doctor, not medicine, not comfort and luxury. He longed for someone to sit beside him in his fear. Wealth cannot buy that, sir. Only presence can. Gabriel's throat constricted. He wanted to argue, to reassert his empire of logic, but the truth in her words stripped him bare. He remembered Ethan's laughter, the way it had sounded like sunlight after months of shadows, and it had not been summoned by him. It had been Clara's gift, given at her own cost. His hands dropped from the window frame, heavy. You speak as if I've failed him. Clara's eyes softened. You are his favorite. You haven't failed him by providing. But love isn't only provision. Love is sacrifice. Love is presence. Her voice trembled just lightly. And sometimes love is shaving your head so a child can feel brave. For the first time in his life, Gabriel Steele, master of negotiations and unshakable authority, stood speechless. Her words sliced through the silence of the study, leaving only the echo of his own absence as a father. He turned to face her fully, seeing her not as a maid, not as staff, but as a woman who had given his son something priceless. And it undid him. Gabriel's chest heaved with unspoken turmoil. The silence stretched, taut, until it threatened to shatter. Clara did not look away. She stood small against the grandeur of the study, yet her presence filled the room like no one else ever had. Finally, Gabriel spoke, his voice low, ragged. Do you know what it is to lose? Clara hesitated, then nodded once. Yes, I do. His gaze hardened, testing her. No, I mean to truly lose. To wake up and realize the one person who anchored your life is gone. To watch them fade day by day while you remain helpless. His throat tightened. I lost my wife, Clara. I watched her slip away, and no fortune I owned could stop it. Do you know what that does to a man? Clara's expression softened with sorrow, but she did not retreat. It leaves scars no one can see. I know, because I lost someone too, and I learned that grief doesn't vanish by building walls. It only softens when you dare to let others inside. Gabriel flinched, the truth piercing deeper than he wanted to admit. So you think I've been hiding? Think you've been surviving, Clara corrected gently. But Ethan doesn't need survival. He needs a father who will show him that love can stand even in the storm. Her words settled like embers in the air, glowing with quiet heat. Gabriel wanted to reject them, to dismiss her as naive, but instead he found himself asking, almost pleading, why risk so much for him? He is my son, not yours. You could have done your work, taken your pay and left. Why stay? Clara's answer came without hesitation. Because I saw a boy who was afraid of being laughed at for something he could not control. And I knew what it was to feel small and unseen. I could not walk away from that. She drew a slow breath. True care isn't about blood or boundaries, it's about humanity. Ethan deserves to know he is more than his illness. Words pressed against Gabriel's chest until it hurt to breathe. All his life he had equated love with possession, protection with provision. But Clara spoke of something deeper, something unmeasurable by money. He turned away, afraid of the tremor in his voice. "You've made me realize I've been absent, haven't I?" Clara's eyes glistened, but her tone remained steady. "I didn't come here to expose you, sir. I came here to help. But yes, you have been absent, not in the body, but in the heart, and Ethan feels it." The silence that followed was unbearable. Gabriel saw his reflection in the glass, a man dressed in power yet hollow in presence. For the first time he despised what he saw. "Clara," his voice broke. He faced her again, vulnerability raw in his gaze. "How do I fix this?" Clara stepped closer, her hand trembling slightly as she folded it over her other. "You don't fix it with grand gestures or expensive cures. You fix it by being there, by choosing every day to show him he is loved. Not by what he fights, but by who he is." The words lodged in his heart like an anchor. For once, Gabriel had no retort, no defense, only a hollow silence filled with the weight of his failures and the flicker of hope she had offered. He nodded slowly, almost reverently. "You're braver than I'll ever be." Clara shook her head. "No, I only did what love demanded in the moment. But you, Gabriel, you have the chance to do it every day. That's the greater bravery." His eyes burned. He had faced boardrooms of rivals, handled empires of power, but standing before Clara, he felt stripped of everything but the truth. He whispered, "You've changed everything." Clara bowed her head, humility woven into her silence. The moment hung between them, fragile yet undeniable. In her presence, Gabriel Steele, the untouchable billionaire, was no longer the master of the fortress, but a father awakening to his heart. And as the morning light spilled through the window, illuminating Clara's bare head like a crown of courage, Gabriel knew his life would never again return to what it was before. The mansion had always been a fortress of silence. Long hallways echoed only with footsteps of staff moving in hurried obedience. Even Ethan's laughter, when it came, was rare and faint, easily swallowed by the emptiness of high ceilings and marble floors. But after the night Gabriel had walked in on Clara shaving her head for his son, something unexplainable shifted. The air itself seemed lighter, as though an unseen curtain had been lifted. The next morning, Gabriel found himself lingering outside Ethan's door. Usually he would rush past, already buried in calls, schedules, and meetings. But now, the sound of laughter, real, unstrained laughter, stopped him in his tracks. He peered inside quietly. Ethan was sitting cross-legged on the bed, his pale face lit up by joy. Clara, her head bald and smooth, sat beside him with a toy sword in one hand and a blanket wrapped like a cape around her shoulders. She was pretending to be his knight, guarding him from imaginary dragons. Ethan giggled so hard, he fell back onto his pillows. Gabriel's throat tightened. It had been months since he'd seen his son laugh like that. Clara noticed him in the doorway and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, her eyes shining but steady. She didn't pause the game, she carried on with the same energy, refusing to let the child's fragile body keep him from being a little boy again. For the first time, Gabriel stepped fully into the room. Ethan's face lit up when he saw him. "Dad, you're here!" the boy exclaimed, his voice cracking with excitement. "Clara's a knight, and I'm the king. You can be..." He paused, thinking hard. "You can be the dragon." Gabriel blinked, startled. He had not been asked to play with his son in years. Meetings, flights, business dinners, all had taken priority. The thought of pretending, of playing along, felt foreign, even uncomfortable. Yet Clara's expectant gaze held him in place. So, Gabriel knelt down by the bed, pretending to roar like a dragon. Ethan squealed with delight, raising his blanket sword to defend his tiny kingdom. Clara cheered him on, laughing as though she had no weight in her own heart, no scars from sacrifice. It was the first time in years Gabriel felt his son's laughter reach him, piercing through the steel shell he had built around himself. Over the next days, something remarkable began to unfold. Gabriel started delaying his office departures. Instead of leaving before Ethan woke, he waited, just to share breakfast. He discovered his son liked scrambled eggs a certain way, fluffy with extra cheese, and Clara always made sure they were done perfectly. Gabriel found himself asking questions. What cartoons did Ethan like? Which book was his favorite? Slowly, painfully, the walls between father and son cracked. One evening, Gabriel returned early again and found Ethan in the garden, sitting on a blanket Clara had spread across the grass. The boy was weak from treatment, but his eyes glowed with excitement as he explained to her the constellations he had learned from a book. Clara tilted her face toward the fading sky, listening as though Ethan were teaching her something invaluable. Gabriel stood at a distance, watching. Clara's bald head caught the last of the sunlight, gleaming like a crown. The boy leaned against her shoulder, safe, unashamed of his own bald patches now. For the first time, Ethan did not look like a sick child. He looked like a child who mattered. The staff whispered among themselves. "Have you seen it?" One maid murmured to another. "The boy is smiling again." "Yes," another replied, shaking her head in disbelief. "And Mr. Blackwell, he actually sits with them now, like a father." Rumors spread beyond the mansion. Neighbors who had once pitied Ethan from a distance now admired Clara. The young maid with no fortune, no family name, had done what all the wealth in the world could not. She gave the child his spirit back. Gabriel began noticing how the community looked at Clara differently. Mothers from the hospital stopped her in the halls, asking if she could visit their children too, or at least share how she had helped Ethan face his fears. Some even whispered prayers of blessing over her, touched by her courage. Clara was uncomfortable with the attention. She never sought praise. Every night, when she tucked Ethan into bed, she whispered the same thing. "You are not alone, and you are braver than you know." It was not only Ethan who heard those words. Sometimes Gabriel, standing just outside the door, heard them too, and they cut deeper than any criticism, because he realized she was right. His son had been braver than him. One Saturday morning, Gabriel surprised Ethan by asking if they could build Lego castles together. The boy gasped in delight, rushing to fetch the box. For hours they sat on the carpet, Gabriel fumbling with pieces while Ethan guided him with instructions. Clara watched quietly from the corner, her smile soft, almost. Later, when Ethan fell asleep surrounded by half-finished towers, Gabriel remained seated, staring at his son's fragile chest, rising and falling. "He used to do this with his mother," Gabriel admitted suddenly, his voice rough. "I haven't touched those bricks since she passed. I thought it was too childish for me. But I see now, it wasn't about the brick." Clara's eyes softened. "It was about being there." Gabriel met her gaze. For a moment, there was no employer and maid, no billionaire and servant. There were only two people who loved the same boy, bound together by his laughter. As weeks passed, Gabriel's transformation deepened. The mansion no longer felt like a monument to loneliness. Ethan's laughter echoed through the halls. Gabriel found himself joining Clara and his son for simple meals in the kitchen, rather than the grand dining room, where the table once stretched like a canyon of silence. One night, Ethan insisted they all have dinner picnicked on the living room floor. Gabriel almost refused. The idea of sitting cross-legged on the carpet with paper plates felt absurd for a man of his stature. But Clara simply began spreading the blanket without asking for permission, and Ethan's pleading eyes undid him. So Gabriel sat, awkwardly at first, but then more comfortably, as his son leaned against him, munching on a sandwich Clara had cut into small triangles. That evening, Gabriel laughed. He laughed, for the first time in years. Clara glanced at him, startled, then smiled. It was the sound of a man rediscovering something he had thought lost forever. The staff noticed too. They began working with lighter hearts, whispering that perhaps the Blackwell mansion was no longer cursed with sorrow. Ethan thrived. Though treatment still drained him, his spirit remained unbroken. He began showing Clara and his father little magic tricks, practicing jokes, even singing softly when he thought no one was listening. His hairless head no longer embarrassed him. He would rub Clara's bald scalp and giggle, proud that they looked alike. Clara's sacrifice had become a symbol, not just to Ethan, but to Gabriel as well. In board meetings, when Gabriel found himself tempted to bark orders with his usual coldness, He sometimes remembered Clara's gentle patience. It unsettled him, but also steadied him. Then came the day Ethan asked for something unexpected. "Dad," he said shyly, "will you come with us to the hospital this time? Not just drop us off." "Stay with me." Gabriel froze. He had never stayed for treatments. His assistants usually handled it. The idea of sitting in a sterile room, watching his son suffer, terrified him. But Clara's calm, steady gaze pushed him past his excuses. So he went. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Ethan gripped Clara's hand tightly as the nurses prepared him. Gabriel stood stiffly at the corner, his heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to flee, to hide behind business. But when Ethan whimpered, reaching out blindly, Gabriel stepped forward. For the first time, he held his son's hand during the procedure. He whispered clumsy words of comfort, his thumb trembling as it stroked Ethan's fragile fingers. Clara watched silently, tears in her eyes. She knew this moment would mark a change. When it was over, Ethan was exhausted but smiling faintly. "You stayed," he whispered to his father before falling asleep. Gabriel sat frozen, tears burning his eyes. It was the simplest sentence, yet it shattered him. He stayed, and maybe, finally, that was enough. Word of Clara's shaved head and her bond with Ethan spread beyond the hospital. Families spoke of her selflessness, and strangers admired the courage of the maid who gave up her pride for a child who wasn't even hers. She was no longer invisible, and Gabriel, for the first time, saw her not through the lens of class or wealth, but through the lens of love. One evening, Gabriel found Clara in the kitchen, tying her scarf after washing dishes. "You've changed this house," he said quietly. "You've changed me." Clara looked up, startled. "I haven't done anything extraordinary," Pete replied, his voice low. "You have. You gave my son his smile back, and you gave me the chance." The words hung between them, fragile but powerful. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. From that day, Gabriel began walking a different path. He canceled unnecessary meetings. He spent mornings reading to Ethan, evenings sitting by his bed. He began to rediscover not only fatherhood, but humanity. And always, beside him, was Clara, the woman who had once been just a maid, but who now stood as the heart of their broken family, the quiet force that stitched them whole again. The mansion, once filled with silence, now pulsed with warmth, laughter, and hope. And every time Gabriel saw Clara's bald head shining with quiet dignity, he was reminded that true strength was not in wealth or power, but in love freely given. The day Gabriel Blackwood stood before his staff to make a public acknowledgement of Clara was a day none of them would forget. His mansion had hosted countless galas, charity events, and high-profile dinners, yet never had it witnessed something as raw and human as what was about to unfold. The great hall, polished marble gleaming beneath the chandeliers, was filled not with society's elite but with the very people who kept the Blackwood empire alive behind the scenes. Maids, gardeners, chefs, chauffeurs. Every eye was fixed on Gabriel as he stood at the center, not in one of his tailored three-piece suits, but in a simple, open-collared shirt. For the first time in years, he looked less like a billionaire mogul and more like a man ready to bare his heart. At his side was Ethan, healthier than he had been in months. His cheeks, once pale, now carried a gentle flush, and his small hands clutched his father's as though he finally believed he would never be alone again. Ethan's bald head shone under the light, and he smiled shyly at the gathered staff, comforted by the presence of the woman standing just behind them. Gabriel cleared his throat, his usual commanding voice softened by the weight of emotion. "I've stood in front of many people in my life," he began slowly, "but I've never felt more humbled than I do standing here today. You all know me as your employer. You know me as a man who has built companies, closed deals, and valued success above all else. But today, I stand before you as a father who was lost and as a man who found the meaning of family again. Because of her." He turned toward Clara, and the room followed his gaze. Clara stood in her plain dress, her shaved head uncovered, her face flushed with discomfort. She had never sought attention, never wished to be in the spotlight, yet here she was, being recognized in front of the very people she worked alongside. Gabriel extended a hand toward her. "Clara is no longer just an employee in this house. She is the heart that brought life back into it." Gasps rippled through the staff. The billionaire who had once guarded his pride and reputation like treasures was openly lifting up a maid, giving her honor no one could have imagined. Clara felt her throat tighten, her hands trembling. She wanted to protest, to say she had only done what compassion demanded, but Gabriel continued before she could utter a word. Wasn't even was drowning in fear. It wasn't my money that saved him. It wasn't the doctors or the endless resources I could throw at his illness. It was Clara. She showed him he wasn't alone. She showed me what sacrifice truly means. She shaved her head so that my son wouldn't feel ashamed of his own. She sat with him when I was too busy chasing shadows, and she reminded us all that true strength is found not in fortune, but in love. Ethan squeezed his father's hand and then tugged gently, urging Gabriel to lean down. In a clear, childlike voice that carried across the hall, Ethan added, "She's my hero." Laughter mixed with tears among the staff. Some wiped their eyes discreetly, others let the emotion wash openly over them. In that single moment, the walls of class and status that had always loomed in the Blackwood estate crumbled. They weren't staff and employer anymore. They were witnesses to something pure. Gabriel placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, his eyes searching hers. "You are not just part of this household, Clara. You are part of this family." His words echoed like a vow, more binding than any contract, more profound than any announcement. Clara blinked back tears, shaking her head slightly. "Gabriel, I never wanted recognition. I only wanted Ethan to feel loved." "You gave him that," Gabriel replied softly. "But you gave me something too. You reminded me of what I nearly lost, what I almost let slip while I buried myself in work and fear. You gave me back my son. For that, I can never repay you." The hall erupted in applause, though none of it felt ceremonial. It was applause born of gratitude, admiration, and relief that their employer had finally opened his eyes to what truly mattered. Clara felt Ethan rush toward her, his small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. She bent down, embracing him, tears finally breaking free. Over his head, her eyes met Gabriel's. For the first time, there was no wall between them, only a bridge built on shared love for the boy who bound them together. From that day forward, the atmosphere in the mansion transformed. What had once been cold corridors filled with silence, now echoed with laughter and warmth. Gabriel, guided by Clara's quiet courage, began to shed the armor he had worn for so long. He joined Ethan at breakfast, where once he would have rushed out to early meetings. He walked with him in the gardens, carrying his son on his shoulders when the boy grew tired. And every evening he was there, reading stories aloud, sometimes stumbling over the words, while Ethan giggled and Clara listened with a smile. But the transformation wasn't just within the walls of the mansion. Word of what Clara had done, shaving her head to stand in solidarity with Ethan, spread quietly but powerfully through the community. At first, it was whispered among the staff, then among neighbors, until eventually it reached wider circles. Clara's act of love, humble and uncalculated, became a symbol of resilience. Parents of other sick children found courage in her. Women in town who faced their own struggles found strength in her example. And in the midst of it all, Gabriel realized something he had never understood before. Wealth could influence, but love could inspire. Clara never sought that attention. She continued her duties with the same dedication, though now she did them alongside Ethan's laughter and Gabriel's steady presence. There were moments, however, when she felt overwhelmed. To her, she was still just Clara, a woman who had known hardship, who had stumbled into this mansion as a maid. Yet now she was looked upon as something more, and she wasn't sure she deserved. Gabriel, sensing her unease, reminded her one evening as they walked through the garden. True greatness doesn't come from seeking it. It comes when someone gives without expecting anything in return. That's what you've done. Clara lowered her eyes, her voice soft. I only did what any mother would do. Gabriel stopped, turning her gently to face him. But you're not his mother, and yet you've loved him as though he were your own. That is extraordinary. His words lingered in the night air, and though neither spoke further, Clara's heart raced. For the first time, she wondered if Gabriel's gratitude held something deeper. As weeks turned into months, the bond among the three of them deepened. Ethan's health improved steadily, his laughter filling every corner of the estate. He no longer cried at night, no longer feared the whispers of children who might laugh at his bald head. Instead, he carried himself with quiet confidence, often reaching for Clara's hand or climbing into Gabriel's lap as though he had finally discovered the safety of a home built on love. One crisp autumn afternoon, Gabriel decided to host a gathering. Not the extravagant galas of his past, but something simpler, more meaningful. He invited the staff and their families, turning the estate gardens into a space of celebration. Long tables were filled with food, lanterns hung from trees, and music drifted softly through the air. It was, for the first time, not a display of wealth, but a celebration of community. Clara moved quietly among the guests, helping the children with games, ensuring everyone felt welcome. She wore no jewels, no gowns, only a simple dress and the grace that made her presence unforgettable. Gabriel watched her from a distance, his heart stirring with emotions he had long buried. This woman, who had entered his life as a maid, had become the light that healed not just his son, but himself. As the evening sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Gabriel stood once again to speak. He raised his glass, his eyes scanning the faces before him. "Tonight is not about me," he said, his voice carrying easily. "It's about us, about the family we have built here, not by blood or by contract, but by compassion. And it is about one woman whose courage changed everything." He motioned for Clara to join him, and though she hesitated, the gentle encouragement in Ethan's tug on her hand brought her forward. Standing beside Gabriel, she felt the weight of every eye upon her, but Gabriel's voice, steady and filled with reverence, carried her through. "Clara showed my son that he was never alone. She showed me what it means to give without expecting anything in return. And she showed all of us that true wealth is not measured in fortune, but in the love we..." The crowd erupted in applause, louder and more heartfelt than before. Clara's cheeks burned with color, and she looked at Gabriel, her eyes shimmering. He smiled at her, a smile that held gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. Then Ethan, unable to contain himself, rushed forward, wrapping his arms around both of them. "We're a family now," he declared, in a voice that rang with innocence and certainty. The crowd cheered, some wiping tears from their eyes. Gabriel pulled Ethan close, and with his other arm he drew Clara nearer. For the first time he didn't hesitate. He embraced her openly, not as an employee, but as someone irreplaceable. His voice was thick with emotion as he whispered, "Yes, we are." In that moment, under the fading light of the sky, and before witnesses who had once only known him as a distant, powerful man, Gabriel found redemption. He had spent a lifetime building empires, but it was here, in the arms of his son and the woman who had healed them, that he found his true legacy. As the evening drew to a close, Gabriel walked with Clara through the quiet gardens. Lanterns glowed softly, casting warm light on their path. Ethan skipped ahead, laughing, chasing fireflies. Gabriel's voice broke the silence. "Clara, I once thought I had everything, but I see now I had nothing without love. You gave my son hope, you gave me a second chance, and I can't imagine my life without you." Clara's breath caught. She turned to him, her eyes wide, her voice barely a whisper. "Gabriel?" He stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "I don't want you to be just part of this family as Ethan's guardian angel. I want you to be part of it as my partner, my equal. I don't care about the past or titles or what society says. I only care about this, about us." His words trembled, not from uncertainty, but from the depth of his honesty. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, spilling over as she nodded. "I never wanted anything more than to see Ethan smile again. But somewhere along the way, you became part of that smile." Her voice cracked, but her heart felt light, as though years of burden had been lifted. Gabriel reached for her hand, fully then, intertwining their fingers. "Then let's walk this path together, not as employer and maid, not as billionaire and servant, but as two souls who found each other in the most unexpected way." In the distance, Ethan called for them to hurry. Clara laughed through her tears, and Gabriel joined in, the sound foreign to him, yet wonderfully freeing. They walked forward, hand in hand, toward the boy who had bound them together, toward a future no longer defined by wealth or fear, but by love. And so, the story closed, not with the grandeur of fortune, but with the quiet triumph of compassion. Gabriel had discovered that redemption did not come from power or pride, but from vulnerability. Clara had proven that love could heal wounds even money could not touch. And Ethan, their anchor, had shown them both that the truest wealth was found not in fortune, but in family.